"Master Chief, you can't wear that pin." The words, sharp and condescending, sliced through the sterile air of the hangar bay, each syllable a public indictment. The small crowd of junior sailors and maintenance technicians, previously buzzing with the nervous energy of an admiral's inspection, fell silent, their eyes darting from the stiff-backed captain to the small, unassuming woman he had cornered. A few of the younger ones, still green enough to mistake arrogance for authority, exchanged smirks. A nervous titter rippled through the group and then died, smothered by the cavernous quiet of the space. They laughed. But the woman, Master Chief Petty Officer Evelyn Morgan, offered no reaction. She did not flinch. She did not scowl. She did not even meet the captain's gaze. Her own eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, remained fixed on the intricate diagnostic panel of the F-35C Lightning II before her. Her hands, small and scarred with the fine silver lines of a lifetime spent with wire and steel, continued their methodical work, wiping a clean, lint-free cloth over the console screen with a practiced, almost reverent slowness. Her silence was a wall, a fortress of calm against which the captain's indignation crashed and broke. In the background, standing near the massive hangar doors with his small entourage, Admiral Thorne watched, his face an unreadable mask of weathered discipline. He saw the captain, puffed up with the self-importance of his fresh command, and he saw the Master Chief, a study in absolute composure. But when the Admiral saw her stance, the subtle, perfectly balanced way she stood, a flicker of something ancient and powerful stirred in his memory. He saw more than an enlisted sailor being dressed down. He saw a ghost from a story he thought had been buried deep in the classified vaults of naval history. If you believe that true authority is forged in silence and demonstrated through action, not shouted from a pedestal of rank, type competence below. The entire scene was a tableau of misplaced power. Captain Davies, a man whose career had been a masterclass in political navigation rather than operational command, saw only a breach of protocol. He saw a small graying woman, barely 5'4", wearing an unauthorized piece of flair on her otherwise immaculate coveralls. It was a tiny pin, no larger than a thumbnail, a simple, unadorned silver disc with a single, intricate knot etched into its center. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't a standard qualification badge, and it wasn't in any of the uniform regulations he had memorized with such fastidious zeal. To him, it was a nail sticking up, and his job, as he saw it, was to hammer it down, especially here, especially now, under the watchful eye of the fleet admiral. "Did you hear me, Master Chief?" he pressed, his voice louder now, laced with the brittle anger of a man whose authority had been met with infuriating indifference. "That pin, it is not compliant with uniform. Regulations, Section 3, Paragraph 405B, it is an unauthorized affectation. Remove it now." He pointed a crisp, manicured finger at her collar, the gesture a public jab. The onlookers shifted, the initial amusement souring into discomfort. They knew Master Chief Morgan. Not well, because she wasn't a woman given to casual conversation or barracks gossip, but they knew her by reputation. She was the one they called when the manuals failed, when the digital diagnostics came up blank, when a multi-million-dollar piece of aviation hardware decided to become a paperweight. She was a living legend in the maintenance decks, a quiet phantom who moved through the chaos of the flight line with a serenity that defied explanation. They had never seen anyone, much less a junior captain, speak to her with such open contempt. Still, she said nothing. Her focus remained entirely on the task at hand. She slid the cloth into her pocket and picked up a micro-calibrated torque wrench, her movements fluid and economical. It was as if Captain Davies were nothing more than a buzzing fly, a minor annoyance in the grand, silent symphony of her work. This absolute lack of engagement was, to Davies, a greater insult than any shouted retort could ever be. It was a dismissal. He felt his face flush, the heat rising to his ears. The Admiral was watching. His men were watching. He was losing control of the narrative, being upstaged by the sheer monolithic silence of an enlisted woman who should have been stammering an apology. "I am giving you a direct order, Master Chief Morgan," he snarled, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "Acknowledge the order and remove that pin, or I will have you written up for insubordination on the spot. Is your entire service record a record I have on my desk and find to be adequate, worth a meaningless piece of metal?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and ugly. He had crossed a line, weaponizing her career, her very livelihood, over a trifle. He was making an example of her, using his rank as a bludgeon to enforce a petty rule. Yet her composure remained unbroken. She simply paused her work, her hands hovering over the delicate machinery. And for the first time, she turned her head slightly. Her gaze, however, did not land on the captain. It drifted past him, across the gleaming concrete floor, towards the towering figure of Admiral Thorne, who had begun to walk slowly, deliberately, from the hangar doors toward the unfolding drama. It was not a plea for help, but a simple, silent acknowledgement of a higher authority, a quiet recognition of the true center of gravity in the room. The challenge, the crisis, the moment that would define the day, did not announce itself with a formal declaration or the start of a training exercise. It arrived, as most real crises do, with a shrill, piercing electronic scream that shattered the tense quiet of the hangar bay. The diagnostic panel in front of Master Chief Morgan, which had been displaying a steady stream of green, nominal readouts, suddenly erupted in a cascade of crimson error codes. A klaxon began to blare from the cockpit of the F-35C, a frantic, pulsing shriek that echoed off the high ceilings. On the massive overhead monitors that displayed the fleet's readiness status, the icon for Strike Fighter Squadron 101, the Grim Reapers, flicked from green to a hard, unforgiving red. The aircraft, the most advanced fifth-generation fighter in the world and the centerpiece of the Admiral's inspection, was dead on the deck. A wave of controlled panic swept through the technicians. A young lieutenant, the lead avionics officer, rushed forward, tablet in hand, his face pale. "What is it? What's happening?" Captain Davies barked, turning his fury from Morgan to the new, more pressing emergency. The lieutenant stammered, scrolling frantically through lines of code that made no sense. "It's a total bus failure, sir. The primary, secondary, and tertiary avionics buses are all offline. It's like the nervous system just vanished. The flight controls are dead, the navigation is gone, even the backup power isn't routing correctly. The manual has no procedure for this. It shouldn't be possible." The technicians swarmed the aircraft, their voices a rising babble of jargon and confused theories. They ran diagnostics that returned gibberish. They tried to reboot systems that wouldn't respond. They were following the book, executing procedures designed for known failures. But this was something else entirely. This was a ghost in the machine, a complex interlocking failure that defied all conventional logic. Davies, out of his depth and desperate to project an image of command, began shouting orders. "Reroute the auxiliary power. Get a hardline connected to the mainframe. I want a full system purge now." His commands were textbook solutions for problems they didn't have, and they only sowed more confusion, his frantic energy a contagion of incompetence. Amidst the escalating chaos, Morgan remained an island of stillness. She had not moved when the alarms first blared. She simply watched the error codes scroll past on her screen. Her eyes narrowed, not in confusion, but in a kind of grim recognition. She was not reading the errors. She was reading a story she had seen before. Then she moved. Without a word, without a request for permission, She pushed past the flustered lieutenant and placed her hand on the fuselage of the stricken jet, just below the cockpit canopy. She closed her eyes for a brief second, as if listening to something no one else could hear. The faint, discordant hum of electricity gone wrong. Her other hand went to a small pouch on her belt and retrieved not a complex digital tool, but a simple, insulated screwdriver and a small, custom-made jumper wire with 2 gleaming alligator clips. The action was so simple, so analog. It was utterly jarring against the backdrop of the billion-dollar technology surrounding her. "Master Chief, what do you think you're doing?" Davies yelled, his attention snapping back to her. "Get away from that aircraft. Follow procedure." She ignored him completely. Her movements were a study in focused, rhythmic precision. She used the screwdriver to pop open a small, unmarked maintenance panel near the forward landing gear, a panel not listed on any of the standard schematics. Inside, a dense nest of wires and fiber-optic cables pulsed with a faint, erratic light. The young technicians stared, baffled. They had never been trained to access that compartment. It was sealed at the factory level, designated as a non-serviceable unit. But Morgan's hands moved with the familiarity of a concert pianist playing a well-known sonata. She didn't hesitate. She didn't consult a manual. She knew the landscape of that hidden circuitry by heart. Her left hand held the jumper wire with surgical steadiness, while her right hand deftly separated 2 specific wires from the chaotic bundle. One thick and coated in black insulation, the other a hair-thin strand of fiber-optic cable. The air crackled with tension. The alarms still screamed. The technicians and officers stood frozen, watching a single, silent woman perform forbidden surgery on the most sophisticated weapon system on the planet. For a heart-stopping moment, she held the 2 ends of the jumper wire poised over 2 specific contact points deep within the machine's hidden guts. It was an act that defied every protocol, every safety warning, every line of code in the maintenance software. It was an act of pure, instinctual, and terrifying competence. Then, with a firm, decisive click, she connected the wire. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The piercing klaxon cut off abruptly, plunging the hangar into a deafening silence. The chaotic sea of red on the diagnostic monitors vanished, replaced in a single, silent flicker by a field of solid, reassuring green. The cockpit lights blinked on, the heads-up display glowing to life. On the main readiness board high above, the icon for the Grim Reaper Squadron switched from red back to a perfect, operational green. The F-35C was alive again. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated awe. In the span of 30 seconds, with a simple piece of wire and a lifetime of knowledge, Master Chief Evelyn Morgan had done what a team of highly trained specialists with the latest technology could not. She had reached into the soul of the machine and healed it. She calmly removed the jumper wire, closed the hidden panel, and it clicked shut with a sound of finality. She then turned, her work done, and her gaze finally and impassively met the slack-jawed stare of Captain Davies. His face was a canvas of disbelief, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces. "No way," the young lieutenant whispered into the profound quiet. That's not possible." The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than the noise it had replaced. It was a vacuum filled with the weight of 100 unasked questions and one undeniable truth. The authority in the room had just shifted, not through a change of rank, but through a demonstration of impossible skill. Captain Davies stood speechless, his mouth slightly agape. The orders he had been barking moments before now seemed like the foolish shouts of a child in the presence of a master artisan. He stared at the restored green lights, then at the small, unassuming woman, who now stood quietly wiping her hands on a rag, her composure as unshakable as it had been during his tirade. His entire worldview, a rigid structure built on regulations, protocols, and the clear hierarchy of rank, had been demolished. He had witnessed something that his understanding of the world could not process. It was into this charged silence that Admiral Thorne finally stepped. He had watched the entire event unfold from a distance, his expression never changing, his keen eyes missing nothing. He didn't stride. He moved with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who carried the weight of decades of command. He walked past the stunned technicians, past the humbled Captain Davies, and stopped directly in front of Master Chief Morgan. He did not look at the resurrected aircraft. He did not look at the diagnostic screens. His gaze was fixed on one thing only, the small silver pin on her collar, the one that had started it all. He raised a hand, not in anger, but with a quiet reverence, and pointed a single, weathered finger at the intricate knot etched into the metal. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not a command, but a quiet statement, a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for years. It was a voice that carried the weight of history, and it cut through the silence, reaching every corner of the vast hangar. "The Ariadne's thread pin," Admiral Thorne said, his voice a low rumble of gravel and salt air. He let the name hang in the air for a moment, a piece of a forgotten language. He then turned his head slowly, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Captain Davies. The captain flinched as if struck. "Captain," the Admiral said, his tone deceptively mild, but with an undercurrent of cold steel that made every officer on the deck stand a little straighter. "Pull up Master Chief Morgan's full, unredacted service record. I want Level 5 clearance. Authorize it with my command code, Thorne Alpha 09er. The request was extraordinary. A Level 5 clearance delved into the deepest, most classified layers of a service member's file, records that were sealed from even base commanders. Davies, fumbling with his tablet, his hands shaking slightly, punched in the codes. He had to override 3 separate security warnings to proceed. The file opened, and a long list of commendations and service history appeared. But at the very bottom was a sealed addendum, flagged with a symbol he had never seen before. A stylized labyrinth. At the Admiral's nod, he opened it. The silence in the hangar deepened as Davies began to read, his eyes widening with each line. His face, already pale with shock, lost its remaining color. He began to read aloud, his voice barely a whisper at first, then growing stronger with horrified understanding. Unit Designation, Naval Aviation Advanced Weapons Skunk Works, Project Ariadne, 2005 to 2012. The name meant nothing to most, but the term Skunk Works sent a ripple of shock through the senior officers present. It signified a Black Ops research and development program operating outside the normal chain of command. Role: Lead Non-Commissioned Engineering Analyst, Primary Designer of the F-35C's Integrated Cerberus Avionics Bus, the very system that just failed. A collective murmur swept through the crowd. She hadn't just fixed the system, she had designed it. Davies swallowed hard, his voice cracking as he continued. Commendations. The Legion of Merit for the development of a manual override for the Cerberus system, preventing catastrophic airframe loss during initial prototype testing. The Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroism, for entering a burning test cell to manually disengage a cascading power surge. The list went on, a litany of secret brilliance and quiet heroism, a career lived entirely in the shadows, a story of a woman who had built and saved the very foundations of modern naval aviation. The final entry was the key. Project Ariadne Decommission Award, the Ariadne's Thread, a unique commendation issued to the 5 founding members of the project team. a symbol of their ability to find a way through the labyrinth of impossible engineering problems. Awarded by order of the Secretary of the Navy, its wear is authorized in perpetuity, superseding all standard uniform regulations. The tablet slipped from Captain Davies' nerveless fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent hangar. The pin wasn't an unauthorized affectation. It was one of the rarest and most significant honors in modern naval history, a mark of genius known only to a handful of people at the highest levels of the Pentagon, and he had tried to order her to remove it in a fit of petty, public arrogance. Admiral Thorne let the weight of the revelation settle, letting the shame wash over Davies and the awe dawn on the faces of the young sailors. Then he did something that no one in that hangar had ever seen before, something that would become the stuff of legend. The four-star Admiral, a man who had commanded fleets and stood in the Oval Office, slowly and precisely brought his heels together. He raised his hand to his brow in a slow, perfect, formal salute. It was not the casual salute of a senior officer to a subordinate. It was a gesture of profound, unequivocal respect. An admiral saluting a Master Chief Petty Officer. "Master Chief Morgan," Admiral Thorne said, his voice clear and resonant. "My apologies for my captain's ignorance. It is an honor to have you serving in my fleet." He held the salute, his eyes locked on hers, a silent, powerful apology for the indignity she had suffered, and a profound acknowledgement of her true worth. Evelyn Morgan, for the first time that day, showed a flicker of emotion. A ghost of a smile touched the corners of her lips. She returned the salute with the crisp, economical precision that defined all her movements. "Thank you, Admiral," she said. Her voice was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of triumph. The moment stretched, a living, breathing thing, burning itself into the memory of everyone present. The sight of a fleet admiral holding a salute for an enlisted sailor was a more powerful lesson in leadership than 1,000 lectures at the Naval Academy. It was a public and complete vindication, a realignment of the moral universe of the base. When the salutes were dropped, Thorne turned his gaze, now as cold and unforgiving as the North Atlantic, back to Captain Davies. "Captain," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "you are a commander of sailors, not just a manager of regulations. Your job is to know your people, not just their names and ranks, but who they are, what they have done. You confused the map with the territory. You saw a rule, and you failed to see the Titan standing right in front of you. You owe Master Chief Morgan an apology, and then you will report to my flag lieutenant. We are going to have a very long conversation about the difference between authority and leadership." Davies, his face ashen, could only stammer, "Yes, Admiral." "Understood, Admiral." He turned to Morgan, his entire posture changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching shame. "Master Chief," he began, his voice thick with emotion, I am sorry. My actions were inexcusable. I was wrong." Morgan simply looked at him, her sea-gray eyes holding a depth he was only now beginning to comprehend. She gave a single, short nod. It was not forgiveness. Not yet, but it was an acceptance, an acknowledgement that the lesson had been received. And for her, a quiet professional to her core, that was enough. The story of what came to be known as the Hangar Bay Salute spread not like wildfire, but like a rising tide, slow, inexorable, and unstoppable. It moved through the barracks in hushed, reverent whispers. It was typed into encrypted messages between sailors on ships half a world away. It became an anecdote told over beers in dimly lit bars in Norfolk and San Diego, each telling adding a thin new layer to the legend. The details were always the same: the arrogant captain, the impossible failure of the F-35, the silent Master Chief, the hidden panel. and the final, world-altering salute from the Admiral himself. It was more than just a story of vindication. It became a parable, a modern naval fable about the nature of respect. It was a lesson that rank was a placeholder for authority, but true authority was demonstrated competence. It was a reminder that the most valuable knowledge on a warship or an air station often didn't reside in the wardroom, but in the calloused hands and quiet minds of the senior enlisted, who were the true keepers of the institutional flame. Captain Davies' transformation was as profound as it was public. The Admiral's very long conversation had clearly been a crucible. He returned to his duties, a changed man. The brittle arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful humility. He was seen spending less time in his office and more time on the maintenance decks, not giving orders but asking questions. He started listening, truly listening, to his chiefs and petty officers. He learned their names, and he made it a point to learn their stories. He once approached Master Chief Morgan in the quiet of the early morning, before the hangar roared to life. He didn't offer another fumbling apology, but instead asked her a simple question about the resonant frequency of a turbine blade. She answered him with her usual concise, technical precision. It was the beginning of a new kind of relationship, one built on a foundation of hard-won respect. He had learned the lesson that some knowledge can't be found in a book. It has to be earned in grease and sweat and the quiet observation of a master at their craft. The event created its own artifacts, its own sacred relics. The small custom-made jumper wire Morgan had used was encased in a glass box and mounted on the wall of the squadron's ready room. Beneath it, a simple brass plaque read, "Think outside the manual." The unmarked maintenance panel on the F-35C, now officially designated the Morgan port, was incorporated into all future maintenance training, a physical reminder that the official schematics were not always the complete picture. Young airmen and newly minted ensigns would be brought to the hangar, and a grizzled senior chief would point to the box on the wall and tell them the story. They would be taught that the person with the most stripes on their arm or the most gold on their hat was not always the most important person in the room. They were taught to look for the quiet ones, the observers, the ones whose hands bore the scars of experience. Master Chief Morgan, for her part, remained unchanged by the sudden glare of notoriety. She deflected the praise and the awe with the same quiet stoicism with which she had weathered the contempt. She continued her work, her focus as singular as ever, but there was a subtle difference. She began to take a young, bright-eyed aviation electronics technician under her wing, a young woman named Petty Officer Sanchez who had watched the entire event with a look of pure wonder. Morgan would see her staying late, poring over old, decommissioned manuals, trying to understand not just the how, but the why of the machines. One evening, Morgan walked over to Sanchez's workbench and, without a fataz word, placed an old leather-bound journal filled with hand-drawn schematics and handwritten notes in front of her. The Cerberus system wasn't born in a lab, Morgan said quietly, her first unsolicited words of mentorship. It was born in notebooks like this. The answers you're looking for aren't always on the screen. The legacy of that day was not the humbling of a captain, but the empowerment of a new generation of sailors who were being taught to value wisdom over rank and competence over charisma. A year passed, and the culture of Naval Air Station Oceana had undergone a subtle but significant sea change. The Morgan method, as it was now unofficially called, had seeped into the very marrow of the maintenance command. It was a philosophy that encouraged curiosity, that rewarded sailors for questioning the official procedures when their own experience told them something was wrong. It was a shift from a culture of rigid compliance to one of informed initiative. The mean time to repair critical systems dropped by nearly 30%. The squadron's readiness rates, already high, reached unprecedented levels. The base became a quiet model of efficiency, a place where the symbiotic relationship between officer and enlisted was not just a talking point, but a lived reality. Captain Davies, now a more seasoned and respected commander, made it a point to personally brief every new officer arriving at the station. He would stand them in front of the glass case in the ready room, the one containing the simple jumper wire, and he would tell the story. He never spared himself in the telling. He recounted his own arrogance, his own ignorance, with brutal honesty. "Your greatest asset is not your rank," he would tell the young ensigns and lieutenants. "It is the experience of your senior enlisted. They have forgotten more about this hardware than you will ever learn from a book. Your job is not to command them, but to listen to them, to trust them, to clear the path for them to do what they do best. The moment you believe the insignia on your collar makes you the smartest person in the room is the moment you become the most dangerous." The story of Master Chief Morgan and the Ariadne's thread pin became institutional folklore, a foundational myth for the new era at the base. It was a reminder that legacies are not built on grand pronouncements or dramatic battles, but in the quiet, methodical execution of one's duty, day after day, year after year. It was a testament to the fact that true respect cannot be demanded. It can only be earned through the silent, undeniable language of competence. Master Chief Morgan eventually retired, not with a grand ceremony, but with a quiet gathering of the handful of technicians she had personally mentored. There were no long speeches. She simply shook each of their hands, her gaze conveying a lifetime of trust and expectation. Her legacy wasn't in the medals in her file or the legends told in the barracks. It was in the hands of the young sailors she had trained, in the confident way they now approached a problem, in the quiet professionalism they emulated. Her spirit, the very essence of the quiet professional, remained in the hangar bay, a permanent, silent presence. The narrator delivers a final philosophical paragraph that explicitly summarizes the story's core theme. True legacy isn't something you leave behind, a static monument to past glories. It is the knowledge that continues forward, the competence that is passed from one generation to the next, the quiet standard of excellence that echoes in the actions of those you have inspired. It is the understanding that the loudest voice in the room is often the one with the least to say, while true strength, true wisdom, resides in the calm, steady hands that do the work, that solve the problems, that hold the line when everything else fails. It is the profound truth that a person's worth is not defined by the decorations they are allowed to wear, but by the deeds they have done, the burdens they have carried, and the silent, unwavering integrity with which they have walked their path. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.